All right, here we go. This is perhaps one of the most important videos you will ever see. Benjamin Netanyahu and Jordan B. Peterson are talking about Jewish right to Israel. And Jordan B. Peterson challenges him, saying, well, you said that the Arabs were there in the past, and even though you were there before, maybe the time frame, why does that matter? Maybe being there after you shows that they have the right to the land. And his response, Netanyahu's response, was perfect. Check it out.
You said the Arabs came in the 7th century, and that's a long time ago. And so from the 7th century to now, you might think of that as being a time frame long enough to allow for a valid claim of sovereignty ownership. But the Jews' rejoinder is, well, we have a much older claim than that, one that spans 3,500 years. And the problem I have with that conceptually, and then I'll get to some other issues that are relevant to this, is that it's not exactly obvious what time frame of analysis should be primary.
You have a very
and
important
I don't really
point.
know how to solve that.
I do, and I'll answer your question. It's a valid question. If the Arabs, having conquered the land in the 7th century and dispossessed the Jews over the next 2 centuries, the Jewish farmers kicked them out and so on, if they established a viable state, a viable national identity there and so on, you're right. These things happen in history. You're supplanted by another people, fine. But that's not what happened. The Arab conquerors themselves were replaced by other. First of all, they did nothing with the land. It's just barren. They actually built one town. It's called Ramleh. That's it. Hundreds and hundreds of Jewish biblical sites and hundreds and thousands of new sites that we built. The Arabs built one place, one town called Ramleh. That's it. So they did nothing with the land. Then they were replaced by other conquerors. Other conquerors came in. The Mamluks, the Ottomans, ultimately the British, a series of conquerors. In other words, they took over the land, lost the land, and did nothing with the land. So if they had done what you say, if they had created, if that house that we were expelled from was taken over by another people, another family, they built a family there, they had children, grandchildren, they extended the porch, they built a parking garage and so on, it's gone. What can you do? You still have the ability to demand reclamations, compensation and so on. But, tough luck. That happens in history. But that's not what happened. Once the Jews were conquered by the Arabs did nothing with it, lost the land to others. Now we come back and bring it back to life 13 centuries later and perform this miracle, and they fabricate a history where we were there all the time. It was a verdant homeland. It was built up. It was nothing of the kind. It was desert. It was nothing. Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of travelogues over the centuries of famous French poets, of Swiss travelers, of German theologians, everybody, of poets, writers, travelers, who describe exactly the same thing. There was nothing there. There was no Palestinian state. There were no Palestinians. They didn't even, the Arabs even didn't call themselves that. They were calling themselves parts of southern Syria, whatever. There was no national consciousness. There was nothing to form the consciousness about. In the 20th century, the Arab world and the Palestinians and their supporters in the West, among the intellectual elites, basically erased history and recreated a fake history that deracinates the Jewish roots that are unparalleled. There is no other story in the history of nations where people fought for so long for their land, for 2,000 years, were dispossessed from it, came back to it, did not kick out an existing population with a national consciousness, rebuilt the land, and now are being told you have no connections to it. You were, you're the colonials. No, we're not. We're not just to give this. Just to give us a fine point, because this is so crucial, what we're discussing. And I discuss it at considerable length in my book because people are so ignorant of history. We are not the Belgians in the Congo. We're not the Dutch in Indonesia, okay? We're not the British in South Africa. We had been there all the time. We had been in the Congo. We had been, if you will, the equivalent in Indonesia. We were kicked out of the Congo, and nothing happened in the Congo. Nothing. No other people there, no development, nothing. Okay, now we come back to our land, build it up, enable immigration from of Arabs, who are now called Palestinians, from neighboring lands, and they tell us, "Oh, you don't belong here. You dispossessed us." This is essentially what Arab propaganda and Palestinian propaganda has done. This whole attack on the Jewish people's right to live in the Jewish homeland, the attempt to erase the Bible and to erase the history after the Bible, and to create a modern fantasy that doesn't exist, based on the Palestinians who want to destroy us, who support terrorism, who are anti-democratic, who are or basically neo-colonials, because they're really the colonials. That is something that I think has. It's not merely folly. It has something fundamentally wrong morally, because it is both untrue and unjust.
Okay, so the claim so far, if I'm going to say lean in the direction of your argument without leaning too far and too obviously, I would say is something like this, and tell me if I've got it right. There's a host of competing claims to the territory that now constitutes Israel, and you could have some debate about, perhaps technically, about which of those claims should reign supreme. The additional case that you make, however, is that the Israelis, the Jews, have done a tremendous amount of work in improving this territory. And I know there's a principle of ownership in Western common law, in English common law, and I'm not a lawyer, so I may muck this up to some degree, but I understand the principle. If you own territory, a vast swath of land, and you're doing nothing to it, and someone comes and squats on it and spends a lot of time improving it, at some point they actually develop a valid legal claim to the property itself. And so there seems to be something intrinsic to our notion of valid ownership, that if you're going to occupy a territory, you actually have to do something with it that's productive. And so that's at least part of the claim you're making at the moment, to buttress the notion that the Jewish people have a valid claim to the present territory.
Well, and
there were a lot of movement back and forth,
yes,
but the Jews have actually taken the land and made something of it.
Well, I'm saying something else, though. I'm saying that they held the land for 2,000 years, were kicked out. The Arabs came and conquered it and immediately lost it to others and did nothing with it. The others did nothing with it. So it was basically, they took over my apartment, okay, a long time ago. The guys who took over, who basically kicked me out, were kicked out themselves. The apartment was left barren, and many decades, in this case centuries later, I come back to this barren mess, okay, this ruin, and I build it up back, and I not only improve it, I not only make my ownership based on improvement, but that nobody else did anything with it. There was no someone else. There practically were no tenants.
Right.
There. That's my argument.
Right. You're also making the case that when the Jews came to Israel, they were doing what they could to coexist with the people who were there, with a sparse number of people who were there, but also to set up a state that would invite other people who weren't Jewish to live there as well. So it wasn't an oppressive regime in any sense.
Well, we know what happened.
Sense of the word.
We know what happened. We know that when 75 years ago, when the state of Israel was declared, you didn't have a single Arab refugee. I mean, the Arabs say now that their enmity to Israel and the reason they went to war with Israel was because of the Arab refugee. But there wasn't a single Arab refugee or Palestinian refugee when Israel was established. In fact, the refugees are the result of Arab aggression and not its cause. And in fact, the Arab onslaught, 5 Arab armies that attacked the tiny Jewish state in its inception, these 5 Arab armies created 2 refugee problems. One, the Palestinian refugees who fled before the advancing armies, being promised that they could come back in a few days because the Jews would be annihilated, driven to the sea. That didn't work out, thank God. But in those 5 Arab states, there lived many Jews. Those Jews were summarily kicked out after our War of Independence. So the Arab onslaught on Israel, on Israel's inception, produced 2 refugee problems. One, Palestinian refugees, Arab refugees, we call them Palestinians. And the second is Jewish refugees. Now, Israel, with less than 1% of the total landmass of the Arab states, takes in the same number of refugees, Jewish refugees, as you had Palestinian refugees. You don't see them here. They're integrated into our society, into our government, into business, into everything. We solved, without the cornucopia of Arab oil, we solved our refugee problem caused by the Arab onslaught on Israel. The Palestinian refugee problem is kept alive by the Arabs that have 100 times more land, infinite oil resources. They keep it alive as a battering ram to produce exactly the propaganda that you say. So basically what the technique of Arab propaganda has been, and I describe it to some extent in my in my biography too, because you have to understand it. You have to see it to believe it, is to turn the results of Arab aggression against Israel into its cause. They first did that with the refugees when Israel was established. They then didn't accept Israel's right to exist, even though we're a tiny country. They tried to attack us again 19 years later and destroy us. That's called the 6-Day Wars. In 6 days, we pushed back the Arab countries and took over our ancestral lands of Judea, Samaria. And again, what the Arabs did is exactly the same thing. They said that our occupation, our so-called occupation of the heartland of the Jewish people, Judea and Samaria, that produced the war. No, that didn't produce the war. It was the result of their attempt, their second attempt, to annihilate us. So this technique of reversing causality, that is, accusing Israel, basically turning the results of Arab aggression into its cause, is again one of these ways of creating the delegitimization of Israel. The reason we have not had peace with the Palestinians is not because of the Arab refugees. There weren't any when they attacked us. The reason is not the territories. We didn't control these territories. They were in Arab hands before the 6-Day War. All of these things are a result of the Arab aggression. And what is the cause of the Arab aggression? It's the persistent Arab refusal to accept a Jewish state in any boundary in our ancestral homeland. And if you remove that, you get peace. Now, how do we know that we get peace? Because this persistent Arab refusal has dissipated. It's dissipated over time. As the strength of Israel, as I describe in my book, as Israel becomes not merely a fact, but a permanent fact.
Wow, brilliant words. And like he said, the Arabs start a war, then they lose the war, then they cry, then they start a war. And they're using the Palestinian narrative to erase the Jewish one, to completely destroy the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. We're seeing that play out. And this video was from, about a year and a half ago. And yet everything he's saying is coming true. They're trying to replace the Jewish narrative with the Palestinian narrative. And it's seemingly working because a lot of people are buying into it. Now, one reason why I think people do buy into it is because we're so successful. It's because Israel is a great startup nation, because you can't have both. You can't be a victim and also be an incredible startup nation. So the Palestinians have now claimed the victim narrative, and we can't really debunk that because they're not doing well of their own problems. It's because of their own faults, and they're trying to blame us. But we can't occupy the victim narrative anymore. Jews have to embrace the startup nation, embrace the fact that we are, God's chosen people, and embrace the fact that we will rise above all of the hatred. For more, subscribe to this channel. If you want to help us make more of these videos, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. That's buymeacoffee.com/JewishUncensored. Thank you, and have a good one.